I am Valerie Still, and this is my presentation on prompting hierarchy. So what is prompting? Well, prompting is just providing an additional support or additional help to a learner after the initial instruction or cue was given until the specific behavior is shown. So, for example, if you would want a learner to follow the instruction of picking up toys, you might tell them to pick up. If the learner does not engage in that specific behavior or does not respond at all to that behavior, then you would use prompting, which is going to be just that additional help in order for them to evoke that correct response. So it's important because in order to help evoke that correct response, it's going to eventually be under the control of the initial SD, so that initial instruction and cue, and you're not going to need all those prompts. It helps move from the more incorrect responding to the correct responding. So here's the prompt hierarchy, and in this here is a list of the least intrusive to most intrusive prompts that are used a lot. So natural would be your more independent responding, and that's going to be the least intrusive because the learner is able to do it the most independently. Where on the bottom you have full physical, and that's going to be your most intrusive, and the learner is not going to be able to do it as independently because they're going to require a lot more help. With all the prompts that I just showed you guys, it can seem overwhelming to know which ones to use for your specific learner and your specific treatment plan. So what you're really going to want to do is look at the learner characteristics. So think about the individual and their preferences and what they need when you're looking at which prompts to use. So for example, if your learner has sensory issues, then they might not benefit from as much from a physical prompt because it's going to require a little more touching. Additionally, if they have like a visual impairment, then maybe a visual prompt is not going to be the most beneficial for them. So we're going to think about what the learner needs and what skills they already have and build off of those when we decide which prompt we want to use. And then additionally, we're also going to think about the skill that is being taught. So in the photo to the right, you can see that somebody is helping a child either draw or write or something. So we can know that maybe a physical prompt is going to be beneficial for that, but a visual cue might not be as beneficial when there's more movement involved. Additionally, another example would be if you want to teach a learner to respond to different phrases like hello, goodbye, red, white, and blue. Those prompts are going to look a lot different if you're using more movement if you're teaching more movement skills like GMI and gross motor, then you're going to use more physical prompts. Whereas if you're teaching phrases, there's not going to require a lot of physical movement. So I'm just going to go over the different types of prompts and then provide some examples. So the natural or independent responding is the learner's ability to follow the instruction after the cue has been given. After a certain amount of time, they have followed it and they're correct with their responding. So if you told them to pick up, they picked up the item, that would be independent responding. That behavior is under control of that instruction, meaning when that instruction is not given, that behavior is not occurring. And this is more natural environments. So independent responding can happen a lot in the natural environment through different instructions and different cues. So the most least intrusive are gestural and verbal, besides independent. And gesture prompt is a gesture or action that indicates to the learner what is expected. So that could be pointing, maybe motioning with your hand, or even looking at an item. So the example I've been giving lately is instructions, pick up, maybe you want to put on her coat. In this photo, you can see that the lady is gesturing to the mess that she wants the learner to specifically pick up. It's an additional prompt, but she's not too much into the learner's environment and not really intruding on the learner. Another least intrusive prompt would be verbal prompts, and this is telling the learner the correct answer. This can be done indirectly or directly. So an indirect could be if somebody waved to you, you could tell the learner, you could say, and then ideally they would say hello. And then a direct version with that would be, you could tell them hi. You're vocally telling the learner what to say, versus an indirect would be kind of cueing at what you want them to say and is just not as intrusive. So an example would be, sometimes we give our learners WH questions. So who did you see today? What are you doing? Those WH. And verbal prompts can be beneficial for those because there's not a lot of movement and the learner's already engaged in trying to engage in a verbal response. Lesser intrusive would be visual prompts and modeling prompts. Visual prompts is a visual cue that evokes a correct response from the learner. So this could be a picture or a video. An example of this would be auditory identification. So if you play a sound of a car on your iPad and you just show the learner the sound, and they're not able to identify the noise, then you could prompt them with that video to show them this is what I'm talking about. And you're not using verbal, you're just using that like picture or video card that you have. Modeling is demonstrating the behavior that is expected for the learner to engage in. So if you tell the learner, do this, and you would expect them to touch their head, if they do not, you could help model it and just repeating that action. Modeling is very beneficial in social play. A lot of learners may not know how to engage functionally in different toys, so you can model how to appropriately play with certain items. The picture I have on the bottom is a visual cue for washing hands, but could also be used, the hand washing behavior itself can be modeled if the learner is not able to do it independently. The most intrusive prompts are your physical prompting. With physical prompting, we have partial and full. So partial is slightly guiding the learner at the start of the behavior by maybe touching their hand or elbow, and you're going to give them a chance to have that response, but you're going to not use as much physical touch. Compared to with a full physical prompt, you're going to complete that whole set of behavior using hand over hand with the learner. This one does require physical touch between the teacher and the learner. So that goes back to the client characteristics and preferences. If they do have sensory issues, physical prompting might not be the most effective for them. Just because it is physical prompting and you are using that physical touch does not mean that we use force with physical prompting. If the learner does push back or try to fight the prompt, then the staff or teacher would just let go. So in this example to the right, I have the instruction of touch head. And here the staff or teacher is touching the child's elbows to give them that partial physical prompt to help them complete the behavior of touching their head. So it's really important to fade these prompts after the learner is engaging in correct responding. The ultimate goal is we want the child to be independent as possible, and we want them to be able to engage in these behaviors all by themselves. So my apologies. So when we want to fade these, we want to think about the child's learning history, how they learn, and what type of prompts to use. So when we're using most to least prompting, this is going to mean we're going to start with the most intrusive. So that might be the physical guidance. If it's not applicable, then we might do a visual or model, and then we're going to reduce the amount of assistance we use. So we're going to start with a physical, and then maybe we're just going to gesture to an item, and we're going to try and get the learner to a more independent responding. This one is beneficial when the learner's history is not really known, so you don't have much of their characteristics or ideas about them. Then most to least prompting would be used. Additionally, you would use least to most prompting for learners who show rapid skill acquisition, who don't need that high intensity prompt, who are able to perform it with a less amount of assistance. So a learner who might use least to most prompting might start off by using a gesture prompt. And then if they're not performing at the gesture prompt, then you could go up to a modeling. And if they're not evoking a correct response at the modeling, then you would go to a physical. So you work your way up to the most intrusive if it's needed to evoke the correct response. But again, the goal is to be independent as possible. So we would love to try and fade out the prompts so the learner is able to evoke the behavior independently. That was my presentation on prompting hierarchy, and these are my references that I used. Thank you.